Looking at our world from a theological perspective. This is the Theology Central Podcast, making theology central.
Well, good afternoon, everyone. It is Wednesday, May the 29th, 2024. It is currently 5:02 p.m. Central Time, and I am coming to you live from the Theology Central studio, located right here in Abilene, Texas. Now, I have some very specific ideas about how to study the Bible. You hear them mentioned all the time, have very specific philosophies about how to study the Bible, about not bringing in your past understanding to your present study, a lot of different concepts. You hear me throw them out all the time. And one of the things I constantly try to stress to people is whenever you're studying something, right? Let's say we're going to study the book of Jeremiah, we're going to study the book of Proverbs, or whatever. When we were doing Bible study exercises, I know this year's been more about the Sermons 2.0 app challenge, but whatever we are doing, especially when it's a chapter or a book or whatever, I always tell you to kind of like live with it, like move in. If you're studying the book of Jeremiah, you kind of, in a sense, move into that world, into that time frame, and you live there. You live there, you think about it, you meditate, you talk about it, you discuss it. You become almost obsessed with it. The more time you spend in it, the better. The more time you spend living in the text, breathing it in, feeding upon it, the more you have a greater chance of retaining it. You have to really, really live with it. I don't know if this illustration works. Maybe it will, maybe it will not. There was a time, I know it's gonna feel like a galaxy far, far away, a very, 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 very long time ago, but there was a time, I know this is gonna be hard to believe, that when you wanted to buy an album, you got in a car and you drove to this thing called a record store. You went in and you went up and down the aisles, and there's all these shelves of music, right? And you would go through. Maybe you already knew what you wanted. Maybe you were just going to spend the day looking, and you look and look, and maybe you choose it because of the album cover, maybe the name of the artist, but whatever. You actually take it, and you had to buy the album, right? You had to pay money for it. And then you went home. Now you had a physical product, right? I'll use paper here. You had a physical product, whether it was an LP, a cassette. For those who used 8 tracks, I know way back, okay, or maybe a CD, but you had a physical product, and you opened up the packaging, right? You had the whatever, the dust jacket or the CD jewel case, whatever you had, right? And you maybe had the lyrics inside, you had the artwork, and then you listened to that album. Now, because you spent money, because you went to a store, because you have a physical product, you had a tendency, because you spent money on it, that you were going to, in a sense, live with that album for a while. You were going to listen to it over and over and over and over and over and over again. And especially depending on the format, if it was an LP, it was very hard to like skip from song to song to song, especially if you didn't want to damage the album and cause problems. You started at the beginning of side A and let it play, and then you flip it over, and then side B, right? And so you had a tendency to listen to all of it. Even with the CD, you could skip, but you paid for all of those songs. You had a tendency to live with those albums. And guess what happened? The albums almost became a part of you. You knew every song, every word. You knew how one song transitioned to the next song. You knew the order of the album. You know, that's track 3, that's track 4, that's track 7, that's track 8, that's on side A, that's on side B. You knew all the words. You may even look at the liner notes and you know who produced it. You may know all the musicians who played on. You may know everything because you had this thing that you purchased and you lived with it. And so the album became a part of you. You remember everything. Well, slowly, because now there's always good and bad, things change. Now you can just open up any music streaming app and just go from one thing to another thing to another thing to another thing. You may start listening to an album, make it 3 songs in. You may jump to another album. You may listen to an album once. You may only listen to 2 or 3 songs on it. Nothing really matters, right? Because you're just paying one price for everything. And it's amazing to have everything, but when you have everything, nothing becomes very special. It becomes kind of just taken for granted. So, but if you'll force yourself to only stick with one or two and play them over and over and over and over, it's still not the same, but you can try to recapture a little bit of that album becoming a part of you. Now, some fan bases still do that. Taylor Swift fans live in those albums. They live them. They listen to them over and 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 over again. And they dissect the lyrics and they look for every clue. Oh, was this boyfriend? Was it this breakup? Was it this? Was it this? Oh, is she talking about her new boyfriend? Wait, is she talking about this? Is she talking about her cats? Wait, is this a clue to this? Is this a clue to her next album? Wait, does it? Okay, they go full blown. But most of the time, people just kind of jump all over the place. And so nothing really reaches that level of significance. Well, in a sense, the Bible. Now, this is why I tell people to buy a physical copy. If you at least buy a physical copy, I think when you buy a physical copy, you have a tendency to use it more because it's something tangible you paid money for, right? It's just not an app on your phone. But if you just go from chapter to another chapter to another chapter to another chapter, and you just jump, and just try to read it all in a year. And I'm not saying there's anything wrong with reading it in a year. The problem is so many times nothing really ever enters into you. It all just stays as this like outside of you thing that you visit every once in a while. But if you'll take a book, a chapter, a topic, a doctrine, and you just live with it and you live with it and you live with it, sooner or later it becomes like a part of you. Right? Then sooner or later, you know everything about Abraham. You know everything about Joseph, everything about Jacob. You know everything about Genesis. You know everything about Exodus. You know everything about Leviticus. Because you've lived in it, you've breathed it. But it's hard to do. I mean, look, it's hard for me to do. For me, I think the benefit I've had is just going to one school to another school to another school to another school. So, I have to do survey, Old Testament survey, New Testament survey. I've had to take a course on the Kings or this or that, or whatever the case may be, though, the historical books, the poetical books, the, prophetic books, apocalyptic literature, whatever the case may be. And so if you just do these courses over and 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 over, sooner or later, these things become a part of you. But it's easy when I'm reading the Bible, I'm like, oh, that was, and I think our devotional culture is very similar to kind of like a music streaming app, right? Oh, today I was in 1 Kings chapter 1, verses 1 through 4. Tomorrow I'll be in Ecclesiastes chapter 1, verses 1 through 2. The next day, I'll be in Amos chapter 9, verses 1 through 2. And it's just like you skip, and nothing is very in-depth. But if you can live in it, that's great. Now, I think expositional preaching was supposed to try to kind of capture that idea, right? The goal is, all right, church, we're going to be in 1 Corinthians for the next 3 to 4 years. So for the next 3 to 4 years, I want you to live in 1 Corinthians. I want you to read it over and over and over and over and over again. I want you to ask questions. I'm going to give you assignments. I'm going to give you homework. And by the end of it, everyone in this church is going to be an expert on 1 Corinthians. But you know what happens? At first, everybody's like, oh, that sounds so good. After about 2 months, nobody's reading the book anymore. Nobody's even really discussing it when they go home. They show up to church. They have a hard time even remember what was preached last week. They're not reading the next text in advance. And sooner or later, you're a year into it and nobody really cares. Now they'll say, I go to a church that has verse by verse exposition and sound all sanctimonious about it. But because the only way for that to really work, because it's so long, is people got to just stay in the book, live in the book, read the book, discuss the book. But it's hard to do. And I think some people find it very redundant. They almost find it boring. But I still try to capture that as much as I can sometimes on the podcast. I'll say, this is what we're in and we're going to stay in it. And some people will jump in. Some people will just kind of visit for a second. But that's what I'm trying to do right now for our summer 2024 kind of study, right? We're in Proverbs. Right? It's all about, so you're supposed to be looking up random sermons on Proverbs. Hopefully you're reading and thinking about Proverbs. Now, I have yet for myself to actually get into Proverbs because I read Proverbs chapter 1, verse 1, the Proverbs of Solomon. And then I was like, why Solomon? So really for me, the summer, the Proverbs 2024 summer study, I know we're only really doing it for a month. It may go longer. For me, is turning into why Solomon for the book of Proverbs study. I'm obsessed with that question, trying to understand how a man who was extravagantly foolish is the one who writes the Proverbs that are supposed to convey wisdom. To me, it's a fascinating contrast, and I'm trying to get people to embrace that contrast. Well, and so doing that, I gave everyone a quiz, and that quiz was, hey, the first question was, why Solomon? The second question is, what advice did David give Solomon? Because I wanted to do a little backstory, right, on Solomon. Well, that backstory led us to 1 Kings chapter 2, and we've been there now for a while, and we're not leaving it anytime soon. So I know that I'm supposed to be choosing random sermons on Proverbs, but I chose a random sermon this afternoon / fast approaching evening time, and probably for some of you, if it's already evening time. I picked a random sermon from 1 Kings chapter 2. I know you're like, but you've already spent like 3 hours in 1 Kings chapter 2. I know, but if we live in it even longer, it's better. And if we hear different perspectives. So I went searching on the Sermons 2.0 app for sermons on 1 Kings chapter 2. And I started looking. The first one I found, and I try not to, when I decide I'm going to review one, I do have to listen a little bit just to ensure the sound quality is okay, because so many of them are recorded at a low volume. And no, I won't go on that rant as I did in the pre-show. Okay, I won't do that. But I will say this. I started listening to one and I was utterly perplexed because everything about it said 1 Kings chapter 2 verses 1 through whatever, but it had something about the church in the title. I'm like, what is this? So I start listening and it's a reading from Galatians. And then I'm like, what is happening here? So like all the information is about Solomon and David and Joab, but then that's the description, but then it's all about the church, and then it's a reading from Galatians. I don't know what was going on there, so I've said, you know what, let's just skip that one. So then I kept looking, and then I found a sermon entitled, Joab, the Loyal Traitor. Ooh, a traitor. All right, okay, that sounds ominous. He's loyal, but he's a traitor. Okay, ooh, that sounds good. Joab. Oh, we know Joab, right? We know Joab, right? From 1 Kings chapter 2. I'm not going to start reading the text. I want to start reading it. But we know about him. We've talked about him. So I'm like, okay, well, this may work. Now, some of you are going to feel like, but this is so redundant. This is repetitive. I remember in some of our series that we've done, I think Jeremiah, I think Law and Gospel, I think there was a couple of other studies where I received emails or maybe comments on YouTube or a combination of like, you just keep saying the same thing over and over. I'm tired of listening to you. You're too repetitive. I'm just sick of it. I'm like, okay, well, I'm so sorry. And I do understand that I don't want to be, but there are times we need to be, right? Because the more we kind of go over something, and what I tend to do is I may be repetitive, but like for here, yes, we're going to be in 1 Kings 2, but you're about to hear someone else's perspective. I highly doubt they're going to present it the way I did. So now you're going to hear their perspective. You're going to hear me repeat some of my perspective. And hopefully you know what it does? It gets you back in 1 Kings chapter 2. Now I know you're saying, but we're supposed to be in Proverbs. I know, but we're supposed to be answering the question, why Solomon? Now, we'll get into Proverbs. Trust me, we'll get into Proverbs at some point. But are you ready? Are you ready to do this? Now, I think I have my notebook down here. Yes. I got my notebook. All right. Have my notebook. I have a pencil, ladies and gentlemen. A pencil. You hear that? That's the sound of sanctification. You know why? Because it's not a pen. The pen is the sound of utter rebellion and wickedness. That's a pencil. Oh, and a notebook, physical notebook. Hear that? More sanctification. And to really show you how sanctified I am, have a bottle of Dasani, because ladies and gentlemen, if it's not Dasani, it's not water, okay? And no, I don't get paid a sponsorship. I should, okay? See, if you have a product, you need me to be a sponsor. We need to work out a deal. I can promote your business okay, I'm joking. All right, here we go. Actually, I'm probably not, okay, but I digress. Are you ready? A little bit of fun. But now we're getting ready to get into a chapter that's not so fun, because we're getting ready to get into a chapter where Solomon basically is given a hit list by David. Kill these people. And then not only does Solomon kill those people that David wants him to kill, he also throws in his half-brother and kills him as well. It's a crazy chapter. We've been talking about it, and I know some may say even very repetitive. But now let's see how someone else handles this chapter. And we do so right now. Remember, I increased this volume 3 times. The first time I didn't think it was loud enough. The second time it's loud enough. This is the third. I still don't think it's loud enough. They recorded this at a volume so low, it's not even, I don't even know what they were thinking, but I did my best. So hopefully this will be beneficial. If it's too low, I apologize. Trust me, I will monitor this to see how bad it is. And I do apologize if it's too low. But here we go.
As David's time to die drew near, he charged Solomon his son, saying, I'm going the way of all the earth. Be strong, therefore, and show yourself a man. Keep the charge of the Lord your God, to walk in his ways, to keep his statutes, his commandments, his ordinances, and his testimonies, according to what is written in the law of Moses, that you may succeed in all that you do and wherever you turn, so that the Lord may carry out his promise, which he spoke concerning me, saying, If your sons are careful of their way, to walk before me in truth, with all their heart, with all their soul, you shall not lack a man on the throne of Israel.
I just have to laugh at how radically different people are behind the pulpit or in preaching or in teaching. His reading of this is, now the days of David drew near, that he should die, and he charged Solomon his son. Or my reading is, now the days of David drew near, that he should die. And then he's like, hey, shh, come here, Solomon. I got to talk to you, right? Like I'm all over dramatic, and I know I get that criticism. I don't like how dramatic you are. You so exaggerated. I don't like it at all. It's just uncalled for. It's just utterly ridiculous. And I'm like, okay, well, I'm sorry. You're I think you may be over dramatic in how much you hate it, but that's okay. That's okay, because I'm so over dramatic. You need to be over dramatic in selling how much you hate it. But thank you for taking the time to send me that email on how much you hate it. I don't know exactly what you want me to do other than change who I am. But if you know me, I'm pretty over dramatic about everything. When I could be reading a novel, I could be reading a comic book, I could be watching television, and I'm going to be like, Okay, so, but all right. But I just like how it doesn't matter. Yes, I'm going to back it up so that, because I interrupted the reading, and so I don't want to mess up the reading. Here we go.
As David's time to die drew near, he charged Solomon his son, saying, I'm going the way of all the earth. Be strong, therefore, and show yourself a man. Keep the charge of the Lord your God, to walk in his ways, to keep his statutes, his commandments, his ordinances, and his testimonies, according to what is written in the law of Moses, that you may succeed in all that you do and wherever you turn, so that the Lord may carry out his promise, which he spoke concerning me, saying, If your sons are careful of their way, to walk before me in truth, with all their heart, with all their soul, you shall not lack a man on the throne of Israel. Now you also know what Joab, the son of Zeruiah, did to me, what he did to the 2 commanders of the armies of Israel, to Abner, the son of Ner, and to Amasa, the son of Jether, whom he killed. He also shed the blood of war in peace, and he put the blood of war on his belt about his waist and on his sandals on his feet. So act according to your wisdom, and do not let his gray hair go down to Sheol in peace. Let's pray.
Couple of things. I'll probably make some comment about the prayer, because I always do. But I can tell you one thing. there's a good thing about the way he reads. Much more articulate. He enunciates. It's much more clear. Where I read and it's like, and I may be skipping over words and I read sometimes way too fast. So there is when the public reading of Scripture probably needs a much more level way of doing it than I do. So I'm aware of my weakness. At the same time, though, sometimes I don't know how people can read that so calmly, right? I don't know like how I can read that. Hey, Solomon, do all of these things. And I'm reading it and I start laughing like, what are you doing? He's not going to do any of those things. Maybe though, see, then I need to act like I haven't read it. And then when he's like, hey, go kill this guy. And like, we just read it as a matter of fact. And I'm like, whoa, wait. Why are you giving Solomon a list of people to kill? What's happening here, right? I tend to, like, I can't just read it without reacting to it. So there's probably positives of both. But now he's going to pray. This is the template so many churches utilize. Read the Scripture, then pray before you preach. You know my questioning of this prayer. Let's see, though, what is actually prayed. Because sometimes I question the content of the prayer. Sometimes I question the purpose of the prayer. I really don't know what the purpose of the prayer is, right? Because either you haven't prayed for your sermon. So now you're going to do it now? If you've already prayed for it, then why do it now? And if you haven't prayed for it, well, then what are you hoping to accomplish in what you're about to pray now? Like, sometimes I think we do things because we're supposed to do them because someone at some point said, this is what you do in church. But who made the rules, right? Okay, but all right, here we go.
Father, we do thank you for your blessings, and thank you for bringing us here tonight, that you just had your hand upon us. You protect us and provide for us. It's a desire that you give us to be in your word and to fellowship together and to sing your praises. Lord, we do indeed thank you and ask for your help tonight. We pray that you would speak to us and help us to understand your word.
Here we go. There's so much of that prayer that I just like, okay, so God's the one who gives us the desire for his word. So if someone in the church doesn't desire his word, then is that on God? And then God, help us, speak to us. Wait, so is God going to speak to us through his word? Is it a specific word for us? Or does just the word speak and then help us understand? Well, I'm always baffled by that. 2,000 years of church history. Christians have been praying, help us understand. 2,000 years later, nobody agrees on salvation. Nobody agrees on baptism. No one agrees on repentance. No one agrees on the Lord's Supper. So is God helping us understand or not? Right? Because everyone says, Lord, help me understand. And then they come to a completely different conclusion than someone else does. So is God helping you, but not them? Or is God helping them and not you? And why do you always think your understanding is because God helped you? Maybe the other person, God was helping them and not helping you. Because God can't be helping both if you come to radically different conclusions. I don't know. I never understand that. God, help me understand. Okay, so then my understanding came from God. Therefore, then is my understanding then infallible? Well, no, it may not be infallible. Well, then is God helping me or not helping me? Either God helps me come to the right answer or he's not helping me, right? If I come to the wrong answer because it just becomes words without meaning at some point. Like when you say these things, they have to mean something, right?
Help us to see application in our lives and help us to understand your sovereignty over all things, good and evil, that you are in control. Help us to understand that better and help us to find rest and peace in that reality. That you love us, you've provided for us, you take care of us, and nothing is beyond you. So we thank you so much for Jesus Christ, your Son, and what he's done on our behalf. Pray and ask these things in his name. Amen. All right, well, the title tonight, Joab, the Loyal Traitor. And a little play on words there, a little oxymoron right out of the bat there. Hey, loyal traitor, that's, aren't those, isn't that a contradiction? Yes. And as I was saying Sunday night, aren't we all contradictions sometimes. When we think of Joab, the reason I want to talk about him, by the way, is because from Sunday night I talked about Solomon as we started in Ecclesiastes, and I just really wanted to kind of lay a foundation there for Solomon and just a sermon or two on who he was, background, how he became king. Most of that I'm sure you know.
Hey, I like that. That's kind of what we're doing, right? Proverbs chapter 1, verse 1, the Proverbs of Solomon. Now, for me, it's why Solomon? It's why. So in Ecclesiastes, Solomon is mentioned, which we could get into all kinds of discussions about that mention in Ecclesiastes 1, but all right. But so he's going to do a little background. That's good. And he ended up going right where I ended up, 1 Kings chapter 2. All right. So this is good. This is awesome. I think anyone who does any background is going to end up in 1 Kings chapter 2. All right. This is good. I like the fact that he said, in a way, we're all contradictions. We are. We're all contradictions. Solomon may be the best example of a living contradiction that we have. The most extravagant fool is the one that's considered the most wise. The most extravagant fool is the one who writes a book about wisdom. I mean, come on. That's almost so subversive. It's almost so ironic. I don't know what the words are. It's absolutely hilarious to me as always, but it's so much us, right? We can be so pious and so spiritual and so godly, but so opposite. Can we not? All right. I think that that's always going to be the case, because as long as we have a sinful nature, then there's always going to be a contradiction, right? Because we have literally our nature is contradictory to everything about God and his word and his wisdom. All right. But all right, let's see what he's going to do here. I've already got questions things I'm waiting to see how he handles. But let's go here. Are you ready? Let's continue.
But just to refresh our minds, and one of the things I said Sunday is, when you look at David and Solomon and people like this, you see men who are righteous. I mean, the Bible speaks of them as they're believers. They have faith, righteous men, and yet at times.
Okay, I got to stop right here. He says righteous men. Now he's going to say, but at times. Now let me make it very clear. When the Bible refers to someone as righteous, this is the question you must always ask yourself. Righteous in their acts or righteous in their position? Abraham believed, and it was accounted unto him as righteousness. He was declared righteous by his belief. His actions were not always righteous. Lot is declared to be a righteous man. Give me a break. Look at the things he did. David is considered to be righteous. Look what he did. If you're ever going to use the word righteous in connection to Solomon, you surely cannot be talking about his life, because that would be a complete and utter joke, right? A serial adulterer, a serial polygamist, an idolater, and a murderer. Okay, come on now, right? So I do like the fact that he may say, I just think when you say that they were declared to be righteous, what do we mean by that? Right? But he's getting ready to acknowledge the contradiction. And here's the question. Are you ready for this? Here's a good theological question. How unrighteous can you be and still be called righteous? See, if you say, well, that person lived a righteous life. Well, how much unrighteousness was in their life? And they were able to still be called righteous, because for anyone declared to be righteous, they're still unrighteous. There's unrighteousness in their life. Or you say, well, the overall direction. So if the overall direction is righteous, you're just labeled righteous, even though there's all this other unrighteousness in you. How much unrighteousness can be in a life and still be declared righteous? Because if you're declared to be righteous, I think that would have to eliminate any unrighteousness, correct? Unless you understand righteousness as referring to your positional standing. I think that's a very important theological thing to consider. But now he's going to talk about the apparent contradiction. They're righteous. However, now he's going to describe some things.
Sometimes they do things that are very unrighteous. And sometimes we wrestle with that, and we try to understand things. Well, how in the world could David have done that if he's a believer? How could Solomon have done that? And I think certainly with the case of Solomon, what you see is him early on, tremendous wisdom that God gave him to govern the people, and he had seemed to have a good relationship with the Lord. And then the idolatry, the paganism, the foreign wives, tries everything, nothing satisfies, and by the end of his life he kind of comes full circle, and by God's grace he understands. Now, David's life's a little bit different. David seems to be, in all honesty, although he didn't have Solomon's wisdom, he seemed to be far more consistent, because, there's just always this love for the Lord that you see with David.
I didn't like the way he kind of minimized Solomon there. Hey, just make sure you realize, Solomon, to have 1,000 women, he was in a perpetual state of adultery and polygamy. Come on, let's just know a way to get around it. Well, at the end of his life, he came, okay, well, great. He lived a perpetually adulterous and polygamous life, but that's okay, right? Sometimes it's just so like we want to so minimize his actions, right? We want to, maybe, I guess David was probably more consistent. Well, I think maybe there's some truth to that. But again, then we get to how do we measure it, right? Like if a person, just think about this, a person could not have 1,000 women. David had 8 wives. Solomon ends up with 1,000 women total. I think David had concubines as well. So if you if you could take a man, never commits physical adultery, never has multiple wives, never kills anyone, never tries to cover it up. He never does any of that. And you would immediately say, well, that man is more righteous. But what if that man in his mind is continually filled with lust and anger and bitterness and unforgiveness and unloving? Is he any more godly than the ones who do it externally? See, it's always so subjective when we try to determine whose life was this or whose life was that. We're just looking at it based on just mere externals. I don't know if that ultimately means much. I don't know. I don't know how I think that's why when we say someone was righteous or someone was godly, according to what? What standard are you applying to anyone who dies, right? Anyone who dies within Christianity, there's a funeral, this was a godly man, a godly woman, they loved the Lord. And you're like, based off and many, like, I think here's what we can all say. Here lies a sinner, okay? Because everyone dies as a sinner, all right? But all right, okay, so let's see where he goes with this.
Now, he had his faults, we know that, but they were more isolated faults. It wasn't like, and certainly his faults didn't involve idolatry and building, idols and things like Solomon did. They both had a lot of faults in many ways.
And again, I would just ask this. Are they isolated faults if you have multiple women and concubines, or at least one concubine possibly, maybe multiple? 8 wives? Is that is it just no big deal? There's no big, that's just, and I know what Chris said, that's just the way it was back then. Okay, well then by that argument, I can say, well, that's just the way it is today. The way it is today is to have, an OnlyFans account, right? Come on, that's just the way it is today. Hey, it's just the way it is today to look at hours of porn. That's just the way it's just the way it is today, to have, to have a same-sex relationship. That's just the way it is today. Is that our argument? That's just the way it is? Well, that's just the way it was back then. That was the culture back then. Well, then every culture could say, well, that's the culture today. So was he more consistent because he had less women? And to me, it's such a subjective way of measuring it and judging it. And I think that is, maybe that's a lesson in all of this.
Ways, but they were righteous at the end of the day. Righteous people who do unrighteous things. Well, the one I'm talking about tonight is kind of...
righteous people who do unrighteous things. Now, then do we not have to understand the righteousness then as an imputed righteousness? Can you be a righteous person and yet do unrighteous things? Because if you're doing unrighteous things, by definition, you're not righteous. So isn't it the only way to understand that they're declared righteous is because of an imputed righteousness? Like, I don't understand. I don't know why this is complicated, especially from a non-Catholic Reformed perspective, right? As a non-Catholic, this is what we have to say. Let me read to you. Here we go. Romans chapter 4, verse 1. What shall we say? What then shall we say? That Abraham our father has found according to the flesh? For if Abraham was justified by works, he would have something to boast about, but not before God. For what does the scripture say? Abraham believed God, and it was accounted to him for righteousness. Now to him who works, the wages are not counted as grace, but as debt. But to him who does not work, but believes on him who justifies the ungodly, his faith is accounted for righteousness. These are men of faith. Their faith is accounted as righteousness, just as David also describes the blessedness of a man to whom God imputes righteousness apart from works. See, God imputes righteousness apart from works. These men are righteous and they do unrighteous things because the righteousness is not a righteousness dependent upon works. It's a righteousness that is dependent upon faith. Is that not the entire point of the Reformation?
The opposite of that. Joab, I don't think you would describe him as righteous. Most of the things you read about Joab, he was ruthless is what he was, rather than righteous. He was David's top general for much of his time, and he had no problem killing anybody who got in his way, be it wartime or peace, be it family, be it foe. He was pretty bloodthirsty. And yet there were times in which you could see clearly in the scriptures the hand of God at work in Joab, using Joab to accomplish God's purpose. And so rather than a righteous man who occasionally does something unrighteous, Joab is an unrighteous man that occasionally does something righteous, or at least beneficial. It's an interesting case study. We'll get into it a little bit tonight. Joab really was a thorn in the side of David for much of his reign. And you wonder at times, why did David put up with him? Why didn't he just finally do away with him, execute him, or remove him from his place of power, which David tried on a couple of occasions, and Joab killed the people that David was going to replace him with. So that takes care of that. But it's interesting, the whole dynamic with Joab. He's an interesting one to study. And then with David, and then when David, as I mentioned this Sunday night, David gets ready to die, and he's anointed Solomon as the future king. And one of the last things David says to Solomon is, make sure you kill Joab. I mean, I'm paraphrasing. He says, make sure you do not let his gray hair go down to Sheol in peace.
It's kind of interesting. We often talk about someone's last words. Now, I don't want to make a joke out of this, but it is somewhat disturbing if you think about it. Here's David basically on his deathbed, right? Solomon, come here. And David's last words basically is, kill, 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 kill. Kill. Okay, maybe that's a little hyperbolic, but it's almost like he's on his deathbed and he's like, Solomon, kill these people. The last thing I need you to know is to kill some people. Like, you would think there would be some other words. It would be this would be like a Hallmark movement, a Hallmark movie, or a Hallmark moment, or a Disney movie. But no. This is kill these people. Now, it's like, what is going on? It just seems so like, it's not like, let's pray together. Let's think about the Lord's blessings. Let's recite the 10 Commandments. Let's remember let's write a psalm together. No, it's kill these people.
In other words, kill him. I think, wow. Now, why didn't David kill him? Or why did he tell Solomon to? Well, those are the kind of things I want to get into tonight. Just kind of at the beginning, these are three little rules, I think, that help. Anytime you're wrestling with something like this, how do you explain Joab? How does God work with people like that? And clearly God used him in ways. Three things to remember. Number one, God is sovereign. You all already know that because the Wednesday night crowd, I think at Heritage, even the Sunday morning crowd knows that. God is sovereign. So that trumps everything. Any argument, any debate, anything you're wrestling with, God is sovereign. That's the top thing.
Now, I have no problem with that point that God is sovereign because that's just a statement of fact. But I don't know if it's just that trumps everything. Hey, why does this happen? God is sovereign. Don't worry about it. God is sovereign. Maybe for other people, that works for you and you're okay with that. I struggle. That to me just seems like, okay, well, God is sovereign. That just trumps everything. Well, there's a million issues here. Well, it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. God is sovereign. That's just the way it works. Well, if he's sovereign, are you saying then he can intervene and do whatever he wants? And if he can intervene and do whatever he wants, well, why didn't the sovereign God who can intervene and do whatever he wants, why didn't he stop and intervene and stop this from happening or this from happening or this from happening? Well, God is sovereign. It's just the way it is. Sometimes it's just like our get out of jail free card. Oh, wait, I don't really understand this. This is complicated. This is uncomfortable. God is sovereign. Boom, leave me alone. You can't question me now. God is sovereign. Well, God may be sovereign, and he's eternal, and he's omniscient, he's omnipotent, he's omnipresent. And therefore, I think he can handle if I struggle and question and don't understand and may even have a difficulty accepting his sovereignty in a situation. Now, ultimately, he's still sovereign, and ultimately, I will have to bow to that sovereignty. But I think it's perfectly okay for a person to go, because look, we're getting ready to talk about Joab. Well, there's some things that are going to happen in this chapter, especially with Shimei, that you're kind of like, what in the world is happening? Right? I think there's, and that just goes throughout the entire Bible. There's lots of issues. All right, but okay. What do I always say? All the problems began in Genesis 1:1. But all right, this is a long sermon and we're already 42 minutes in. So if we're going to get to a decent stopping point, we got to keep going.
That we need to know that should govern our lives like a train on the tracks, the sovereignty of God. The second thing is, we are accountable for our actions. I mean, if there's anything Romans 9 teaches us, it's that you can't just come to God and say, well, hey, you're sovereign. It's not my fault what I do. Romans 9 blows a hole in that. In fact, it says, who are you to even question God? Much less try to defend yourself. So God is sovereign and we are accountable. And I know that some...
Look, I got no problem saying that God holds us accountable. I still can ask some questions. If God is sovereign and things are going to work according to his plan and his will, then you know what? You can tell me that, but I'm still going to ask some questions. Why is a kid right now? Why is there some kid right now being molested? God is sovereign. Why is some woman being beat right now? Why are people starving? Why are people dying? There are children with diseases right now that they're in some hospital and they're not going to see their first date, their first kiss, and they're never even going to make it to high school. And you know what their life is going to be of? Suffering, 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 suffering. I think I can ask that question. I think you can ask the question if you were beat or you were abused or something happened to you. I think you can ask that question. I think we can ask this question. Well, why does God seem to step in to stop sin in some situations in the Bible? And in other cases, God doesn't even bother to lift a hand to stop it. I think it's perfectly okay. If God wants us holy, then why doesn't he just eliminate our sinful nature? If God wants us all to be unified and believe the same thing, then why don't he just give us the very clear answers to all of our theological issues so that we would be unified? If God is the one supposedly leading us into all truth, then why don't we have the same truth? I mean, these are questions that are perfectly okay. I got no problem saying God is sovereign. I got no problem saying that we are going to be held accountable. But at the same time, I think it's easy to ask, it's perfectly okay to then say, well, wait a minute. If I'm accountable, well, and God is sovereign, well, why, if God is going to hold me accountable for doing A, B, C, D, and God is sovereign, he can fix the situation so I won't do A, B, C, D. So does God want me to do A, B, C, D or not want me to do A, B, C, D? If he doesn't want me to do A, B, C, and D, he can fix the situation so that I won't. I mean, I appreciate these points, but but sometimes these points, and I'm not saying that's what he's doing, but sometimes these points are stated as if just to tell everyone, stop questioning, stop doubting, stop struggling, and just accept the way it is. But I think we have to be willing to struggle and ask questions.
Sometimes that's a tension for people. They don't see how that can be the case. Well, if God is sovereign, how can I be accountable? Well, because the Bible says you're accountable. If God says you're accountable, then you're accountable. Why? Because he's sovereign. Whatever he says goes. Whatever he says counts. Whatever he says is truth. So, okay, number one, God is sovereign. Number two, you're accountable. Number three, you ready? Number three, God is sovereign. It kind of comes back full circle. Yeah, it's the same one as number one, but the temptation is when you wrestle with accountability, for example, and you say, well, if God's in control, then how am I really, what I did was bad, but it was a part of God's plan, so I guess it was okay. Listen, when David sinned, Nathan told him what you did was displeasing to the Lord. There was no bones about it. It did not please God on some level. Now, and you can also say on some level, God is sovereign, and what comes to pass because he ordains it. That's just a tension you have to live with if you're going to read the Bible.
Okay, I'm glad he admitted that there is a tension there. Like on one hand, David is held responsible. On the other hand, it's got to be a part of God's plan. God could have intervened and without even look, if he can intervene and part the Red Sea and plagues and all the things he did, right? He could have just easily manipulated that situation just ever so slightly so that David and that sin would have never occurred. We know God intervened when Abram was like, hey, she's my sister, take her. And they took her, and then God intervened to stop anything from happening to Sarah. So there's times God would intervene, and there's other times God's nowhere to be found. He's like, okay, he's just like, wait, you could stop. Nope, he doesn't stop it. Now, I do admire and completely agree. That is a tension. And yes, if you're going to study the Bible and study theology, you're going to have to deal with this tension. And it's never going to be easily reconciled. That doesn't mean to me that you should just say, well, God is sovereign and that solves it. I think we have to then struggle with the tension. All right, but let's see if we can get actually into this thing about Joab and see if we can get somewhere.
God is sovereign, you're accountable for your actions. And when you wrestle with the fact that you're accountable for your actions, and if you're ever prone to say, well, maybe there is a free will argument here, because after, just stop right there and go on to number 3, which says, God is sovereign. Well, or sometimes people will go a free will route to try to explain accountability. Or even worse, or just as bad at least, sometimes people will get it in their mind that, well, maybe God's not completely sovereign. He's partially sovereign. Maybe he, there's certain things he doesn't have power over. Nope. Go back to number 1, go back to number 3. God is sovereign. You're accountable. God is sovereign. And number 4 is C1 and 3. And the number 5, well, I could really make quite a list here, couldn't I? They'd all be the same. Okay, so that's what we keep in mind as we study the life of Joab, the life of anybody else. Study your own life. You remember that God's sovereign and that you're accountable. All right, so Joab sins against David is what I want to start off with, because that's what David says. Really, I read to kind of give the background, but verse 5 is what I'm looking at. Verse 5 and 6 is all we're looking at. David tells Solomon, now you also know what Joab, the son of Zeruiah, did to me and what he did to the two commanders of the armies of Israel. All right, Zeruiah is the sister of David, which means Joab is the nephew of David.
Oh, that's really good. And our looking at it, I did not mention that. In fact, I kept saying Joab, the son of Zeruiah. I kept wanting to call Joab Zeruiah. I kept wanting to refer to Joab as Zeruiah just because I was trying to ensure that I was saying Zeruiah correctly. So I almost became so fixated on the son of Zeruiah that I probably even referred to Zeruiah as a he, probably. I probably even referred to him almost as Zeruiah as being the father, not the mother. Okay. But, that's interesting that Joab is related. All right, that's interesting. That's some interesting information here.
Which complicates things at times, I think. And that's not the only nephew of David that Joab has. There's three of them, brothers, right? Joab, Abishai, Asahel. And they're all generals, and they're all warriors, and they're all tough, and they're all really good, and Joab's kind of the top of those three. But they're all nephews of David, and David's got other nephews. Amasa, who we'll talk about a little bit later, is also a nephew of David's from a different sister. Now, this is really reading more into it than you probably need to, but as I think about that, man, David with all these nephews, because I think my nephews are like, this big. So how would that all work? Well, David was the youngest in his family, right? And so his sisters are probably quite a bit older, which means their kids may be David's age or close to it. Maybe a little bit younger, but they're old enough to be warriors at the time, even when David is a young king. And so the situation with Joab, and David tells Solomon, execute him. Don't let him live. Use your wisdom and don't let him live. And David mentions right off the bat, you know what he did to me, what he did to the two commanders of the armies of Israel. Now, what he did to the two commanders of the armies of Israel, that could be interpreted as what he also did to David. I'll get to that in a minute. But David basically had reached a place with Abner, who was a general over Saul's household, Saul's people, Saul's followers. Saul's gone now, but David, they're still warring with one another. The Bible says David is increasing in power, Saul's household is weakening in power. You can see the handwriting on the wall where this is going. Abner finally surrenders to David. David has peace. He's going to unite everybody, and then Joab goes and kills Abner. And so it potentially ruins the peace process that David had kind of worked on. And then later on, Joab basically does the same thing with Amasa. Only this time, it's not Saul's followers, it's Absalom's followers. So this is later in life. David, he gets everybody back together again, and Joab almost ruins it again a second time by killing the top general, the top commander of Absalom after he had agreed to peace with David. But the thing that really seems to have that David took as a personal offense, obviously, and never seemed to have gotten over, if you could say that.
Now, hopefully at some point he'll acknowledge why Joab, the son of Zeruiah, so I always focus on that, why Joab killed Abner. See, Joab had previously killed Abner, who was a prominent commander who had defected from Saul's side to join David. Despite Abner seeking reconciliation with David, Joab harbored a deep-seated grudge against him for killing his brother during a battle. I think we can't just say, well, just Joab just decided to kill this guy. There was a reason why, right? His brother had been killed. I think we can't just remove that, right? Because sometimes what we have a tendency to do is the villains in the Bible, we remove anything that may explain their actions, and the heroes in the Bible, we always offer some explanation to diminish their villainy, their wrong. So maybe he will mention it, but just make sure Joab kills Abner because Abner had killed his brother. There's a little bit of resentment there, grudge there. And he kills Amasa because Joab thought Amasa was a threat to his position. Let's not forget those elements to this, because I think David is going to have some people killed because he believes they're a threat to Solomon's position. So I think I really stressed the actions of Joab because I believe understanding his motives for doing it, those same motives show up in David and in Solomon.
Is the death of Absalom. Now, of course, Absalom is David's son, and when we read about Absalom, he was arrogant. He was the one who decided he would be king while David was still alive. Now, Sunday night I talked about Solomon and Adonijah, two other sons of David. Adonijah sets himself up as king. David's nearing death, though. And so he's saying, I'm his successor. And Nathan and Bathsheba and David, all three said, no, you're not.
Did you notice he just referred to him as Adonijah? And I refer to him as Adonijah. Is it Adonijah or Adonijah? Now I'm questioning my own pronunciation. Adonijah or Adonijah? Which one is it? Adonijah or Adonijah? Adonijah. Yeah, Adonijah. Adonijah. I think Adonijah. Adonijah? Adonijah. That's interesting. That's interesting. I'll have to, maybe I need to correct the way I've been saying it.
Solomon is. And so that's what that was all about. But when David still, he still has his strength about him, Absalom decides he's going to be king. And really, this is a rebellion to the extent that Absalom would have killed David to have had the throne. A very ugly situation in David's life. A very heartbreaking situation. Well, what ends up happening is Absalom and his men that rebelled end up going up against David and his generals, one of which is Joab. And as they go out to war, this is what it says, 2 Samuel chapter 18, verse 5. The king, David, he charged Joab and Abishai, that's Joab's brother. So it's three generals. Asahel's dead by then. Joab, Abishai, and Ittai. And the king charged the three generals, Joab, Abishai, and Ittai, saying, deal gently for my sake with the young man Absalom. And all the people heard when the king charged all the commanders concerning Absalom. So Absalom is the villain at this point. He is the main threat to David's throne. And he's come, he wants to do away with David, he wants to set himself up as king, and he's David's son. And so how do you deal with that? Well, from a king standpoint, from a military standpoint, from a national standpoint, you have to deal with this rebellion. And so Joab and the other generals go out to fight, and David says, right or wrong, he says, in the presence of everybody, deal gently with Absalom. And he throws this in there, deal gently for my sake. Now, by that, I think David's implying something. He's implying, look, I know Absalom deserves to die. I know you're going to battle. I know what could happen. I'm a warrior myself. But for my sake, okay? I know you would like to kill him, but he's my son. So for my sake, deal gently with him. Well, Joab didn't deal gently with him. The Bible goes on to tell us in 2 Samuel 18, describing this battle. It took place in the forest of Ephraim. You might remember reading this. 20,000 men end up dying.
Now, isn't it interesting here? David wants them to be gentle with Absalom. But is David going to be gentle with these other people that he wants Solomon to kill? And if Joab does something here, is David wanting Joab killed? Is he? And even though he says, hey, I want this man killed because he killed Abner and Amasa, does he have some other personal reason for wanting Joab killed? We didn't even explore this idea. We didn't even explore this so far. So this is really good because we're getting another layer to the story. Let's see where this goes, because again, so many times in the Bible, when someone says something, when someone does something, sometimes there can be some underlying motivations that you have to explore to find, because no one's I know this is going to be shocking, but your motivations are never pure. My motivations are never pure. We can always state this is the reason, this is the cause, but sometimes our motivations are so self-seeking, and we always love to cover up our selfish, self-seeking, sinful motivation in the most self-righteous clothing we can find. Especially as Christians, we will use God, Jesus, religious language. We will sound so righteous and pure and pious when in many cases there's something else going on. So are we about to get a possible motivation for why David, when he's about to die, is like, hey, Solomon, get rid of Joab. Get rid of Joab.
And the Bible says that the forest killed more men than the sword. And so if you've ever tried to go through some thick timber, either walking or on a horse or on a four-wheeler or whatever, it can be pretty rough. Well, you imagine trying to go through it really fast because you're in a battle. There's a lot of carnage that took place. All right, and so this happens, and of course, you know the story of Absalom gets his hair caught on a tree. Now, that wouldn't be so significant except for the fact the Bible tells us that Absalom used to cut his hair and weigh it once a year. He'd have a big ceremony. Let's see how much my hair weighs. And he'd take it off and cut it and weigh it. It's ridiculous. It sounds like a pro wrestling move or something. I don't know. It was a carnival type atmosphere. So,
hey now, look, we can disagree on theology. Don't you dare say something negative about pro wrestling. Come on now. There's a line that we cannot cross. Okay, let's continue.
So Absalom's hair was his pride, and lo and behold, that's what he ends up getting snagged by. A low-hanging oak tree. And well, we have some of those around here, so you see how that could happen, particularly if it's really thick timber. And here's what happens. The first guy that sees him runs and tells Joab, but he doesn't. The first guy doesn't kill him for an obvious reason. He heard the king say, don't kill him. So he goes to Joab. 2 Samuel 18, verse 10, when a certain man saw it, he told Joab, behold, I saw Absalom hanging in an oak tree. And Joab said to the man who had told him, now behold, you saw him. Why then did you not strike him to the ground? I would have given you 10 pieces of silver. The man said to Joab, even if I should receive 1,000 pieces of silver right in my hand, I would not put out my hand against the king's son. For in our hearing the king charged you and Abishai and Ittai, saying, protect for me the young man Absalom. Otherwise, if I had dealt treacherously against his life, and there's nothing hidden from the king, you yourself would have stood aloof. In other words, Joab, you're griping at me because I didn't kill Absalom. Well, guess what would have happened? If I had killed him, the king would have executed me, and you would have stood there like a bump on a log, not saying a word to defend me, because you're Joab, and that's how you are. And Joab responds. Then Joab said, I will not waste time here listening to you. So he took 3 spears in his hand, and he thrust them through the heart of Absalom while he was still alive, in the midst of the oak. And 10 young men who carried Joab's armor gathered around and struck Absalom and killed him. So they roughed him up pretty good. Now, after this happens, one of the main priests there was a man named Zadok, and his son was a messenger, very fleet-footed, the Bible says. And after this happens, he wants to run and tell David the good news. Good news. The threat is gone to your kingdom. Everything, we have peace now. And he comes to Joab and he says, let me run and tell the king. And Joab says, no, you're not going to run and tell the king. Oh, yes, let me be the bearer. And Joab basically says, look, David's not going to take this well, okay? You're not going to be bringing good news. You're going to be bringing bad news. I'm going to send this foreigner instead, a Cushite. And so he sends a Cushite. He says, well, I want to go after him. And so this guy's just really eager. He's the son of the priest. And so he takes off. And what ends up happening when you read the account, the son of Zadok outruns the Cushite and he gets there first. And David's watching from a distance. Oh, I see one messenger. Good news. Oh, now I see two messengers. Oh, well, what does that mean? And so the first messenger comes, the son of Zadok, and he says, good news, king, your kingdom is secure. But he doesn't say anything about Absalom. And then the Cushite comes, and David says, any word on the young man Absalom? And the Cushite says, may every enemy of the king end up like that man. Ooh, wasn't the right thing to say. Tells us in 2 Samuel 18, verse 33, the king was deeply moved and went up to the chamber over the gate, and he wept, and thus he said as he walked, oh, my son Absalom, my son Absalom, would I had died instead of you. Oh, Absalom, my son, my son. It's very sad to see David's reaction. You can't imagine what he's facing here. I mean, the tug of war kind of going on there in his heart. On the one hand, as king, it's his job to protect the country against rebels.
Now, we're adding a whole layer to this. If you go back to 1 Kings chapter 2, when David calls Solomon, moreover, you know also what Joab the son of Zeruiah did to me, and what he did to the two commanders of the armies of Israel, to Abner the son of Ner, Amasa the son of Jether, whom he killed. Now, obviously, when he says, you know what he did to me, remember, I kind of threw a little bit of this in there, but I did not pursue it, right? I just threw it out there, right? And I'm like, well, wait a minute. What do you mean what he did to me? He killed these other guys. Clearly what he's referring to here, he doesn't say it. He makes it like, look, you need to kill him because of what he did to these other commanders. Is David really wanting this man killed because of what he did to these other commanders? Or does he want this man killed because of what he did to his son? Is this just purely like David is still holding a grudge? No, wait a minute. He kills Joab, who killed Abner, and he wanted Abner killed because Abner killed Joab's brother. Now, has David not killed this man because Joab is related to him? I mean, like, there's a lot. Nothing about this is pure. You can try to justify this all day. This whole thing just seems like, wait a minute, you're in the middle of a war. This guy, and you can say this guy was wrong for what he did. Maybe he was, but you're still in the middle of a war. These are soldiers. But the point is, David should just be like, look, hey, Solomon, come here. I want the man killed because of what he did to my son. I'm not going to give any other pretense. I want the man killed for that. But hey, I used to make the joke in the military because I watched it happen in the military so many times. There's so many rules, so many regulations, so many this, and, Air Force instructions and regulations and rules, and you got all of this. And if someone doesn't like someone, they will find a way to be able to write them up and write them up and write them up. So next, a letter of counseling, a letter of reprimand, and an Article 15, and then boom, kick them out. And I watched people because of a personal vendetta, but they could find rules saying you didn't do this, you didn't do this, you didn't do this, and the next thing the person is gone. It was pure selfish, and they acted like they were maintaining the rules. No, you use the rules to get rid of someone. Is David got a deeper issue here? Now, we did not cover this because we were focusing on 1 Kings 2, what the text was saying. We weren't expanding beyond that because we were already going from Proverbs to here. I probably should have, but this really adds something. So this is really, really good information. But now you can go back to 1 Kings 2 and go, wait a minute. David, he's about to die, and all he can think about is kill. Is it because of simple revenge? And isn't that what Joab, why he killed Abner? For the same reason?
Such as this. But when the rebel ends up being your own son, and then, lo and behold, he gets killed in battle, this is a day of victory. My son died. It's a day of victory. And so David just really, he doesn't take it well. And what ends up happening is the victorious army comes back, but everybody knows that David is in deep mourning because of Absalom, and so nobody's celebrating. Even though they won a huge victory, nobody's celebrating. It's kind of like a funeral mindset. And Joab comes to David, and he unloads on him. He lets him have it. 2 Samuel 19:5. Joab came into the house of the king and said, "Today you have covered with shame the faces of all your servants who today have saved your life and the lives of your sons and daughters, the lives of your wives, the lives of your concubines. And here's what you've done," he says, "by loving those who hate you and by hating those who love you. For you have shown today that princes and servants are nothing to you, for I know this day that if Absalom were alive and all of us were dead, you would be pleased." And so he lets him have it. Any thoughts? Joab right or
Now he's getting ready to ask, was Joab right or wrong? But please note, he refers to David's wives and concubines. David had wives and concubines. And now David is and again, all these people who are trying to protect David, save the kingdom, David is more concerned with his son than any of these other people. I don't know. You may say Joab is right or wrong. But David is not guiltless in this in any way, shape, or form. That's why David is used in Romans 4 as, thank goodness, God does not impute our sin unto us, and he gives righteousness by faith, because David would not be declared righteous based on his works.
wrong? David right or wrong? Anybody have any ideas on that? Do you think Joab was right to go in and unload on David? Do you think David was right to mourn and grieve and kind of not really partake of the celebration? Tim, you got a thought?
I think David's right, because, you know, that's his family, that's his son, regardless of if he's a rebel, there's still that, I guess you would call it, blood connection.
Right.
So, yeah, a man is going to mourn his child.
Right. And that certainly makes sense. I think you see that in David. Even when David had a son he didn't even know. I mean, the first baby that died with Bathsheba, David was distraught. And so you kind of see that in David, like you say, the blood thing.
Now, someone in the congregation, if you can't hear it very well, but someone seems to be defending David's actions. Hey, what David is doing here is good. He cares about family. But if David is so concerned and caring about these individuals, is he not, when he wants Joab killed? Joab is the son of whom? David's sister? Is this not a relative? So is some blood more important than others? I mean, I think that's something you have to ask, right?
You know, he's a man after God's heart. He's loving and caring even for Absalom that wasn't, that was kind of a rebel and again.
Now, you can't hear that, but the man just said, David was a man after God's own heart. So he's showing love even to the rebel. Well, where's his love for the people he wants Solomon to kill? If David is a man after God's own heart and shows love even to a rebel, then where's his love and concern for the people that he's having Solomon kill? See, this is the thing that blows my mind with the way Christians read the Bible. See, the hero is David, so David is just automatically like, everything he does is good. Well, if he can show love to a rebel like Absalom, then why doesn't he show love to, quote unquote, a rebel like Joab, who happens to be family, right? I mean, if he's so loving, then why does he have Shimei killed, who repented, and David promised he wouldn't kill him? Or maybe David is acting out of pure human emotion and selfishness. But see, David is a man after God's own heart. So then we always find a way around it. I've even heard men who preach on David's sin put the blame on the woman. Well, she had to know that David walked out on the roof. She was taking the bath down there because she wanted David to see. They put the blame on her. We can't keep, it's perfectly okay to say the men in the Bible were messed up and flawed. It's okay to say that. You know why? Because those of us preaching it and reading it and studying it and listening to it right now, we're all messed up.
Mm-hmm.
See, the man said it again. He's a man after God's own heart. So this is a reflection. See, what David is doing here is a reflection of being a man after God's own heart, because he's showing such compassion even to the rebellious Absalom. Oh, man. Okay. Let's continue.
Yeah, and you can't, and that's the thing, you can't get past the fact that it's David's son. Yeah, it's a rebel, but it's David's son. And one of the things...
The person in the congregation was really like, hey, this is David showing grace and mercy. This is David being a man after God's own heart. David's the good guy here. David's such a great guy. And when he's getting ready to die, all he can think about is these people dying because he wants to show grace and mercy. Now, you could argue that I go too far the other way, that I want to paint everyone in the Bible as a horrible sinner. And maybe some people go the other way, making everyone a flannel graph for Sunday school or vacation Bible school, making all these people the heroes. Maybe people go to extremes. Maybe there's a more happy medium. Maybe I'm too far to the other extreme. But I have a hard time painting David as a good guy, because this changes 1 Kings 2 dramatically to me. This is not, hey, this guy was really bad because he did these things. Or maybe this guy's really bad because what he did to me. Maybe that's really the key there. See, we didn't explore that, did we?
That's interesting when you factor that in. It kind of, to me, I think you can almost see a picture, and here's the phrase that Joab uses that really kind of struck me in verse 6. It's 2 Samuel 19, verse 6. He's rebuking David, and he says, you've brought shame upon all of your servants today by loving those who hate you. By loving those who hate you. And I thought, as I read that, I thought, you almost have a picture there of how God treats the elect prior to their conversion. Now you say, prior to your conversion, what was your attitude toward God? Oh, I loved God. No, you didn't love God. You did not love God, not according to the Bible, not according to your actions.
I do not think this is a picture of God and his the way he treats the. You see, he's making Joab the bad guy. Hey, Joab just doesn't get it. See, David is loving even his enemy. He loves those who hate him because that's what God would do. If David loved his enemies, then why is he having people killed in 1 Kings chapter 2? If he loved his enemy, I don't know, why did he have a woman's husband killed? And the very next phrase is, you hate those who love you. Okay, right. So I don't know.
I mean, even if you're raised from way back when to love the Lord, that doesn't mean you love the Lord. You might have done certain things because you were taught to, but you didn't have a heart that loved the Lord. You loved yourself. I loved myself. I did what I wanted. I did what I was forced to. But to have a heart that desired to please the Lord, I didn't have that. Nobody has that by nature. By nature, we hate the Lord. We don't want anybody telling us what to do. And yet, what's David's reaction to Absalom, who hates him? He loves him. He loves his enemy. He loves someone who hates him. Now, when you think about this, there's, he's a rebel. He's an enemy to David. And he's made himself an enemy. Remember, he did a lot of bad things to David. He embarrassed David in a lot of ways. David has to flee the city because of Absalom. I mean, it's an ugly situation all the way around. But then when he dies, David's so distraught. Now, David has seen people die before. He wasn't distraught. David's killed people before and he wasn't distraught. David didn't cry like that over Goliath, did he? He rejoiced over Goliath. David didn't cry when the guy that came that said he had killed Saul. And David said, execute him. He didn't cry over that guy. So he doesn't cry over Goliath, but he does cry over Absalom. Why? What's the obvious difference? I'll tell you the difference. There's a big difference between being a Philistine and being a son. See, that's the thing. Now you compare that to the elect and our relationship with the Lord. There's a big difference between being chosen and being a reprobate. And you say, it's important to realize, even if you're elect, that doesn't mean you were still dead in your trespasses and sins. You were still an enemy of God, and He still loved you in spite of that.
I'm really struggling with this, trying to pull this and apply. I'm really struggling with this. This is almost like completely making David out to be this great guy here.
Well, even if you try to make him a great guy here in Samuel, when he's laying on his deathbed, he still wants people killed. So where is all of his mercy, compassion, and love? Then, he has mercy and compassion because it's a son whom he loves. He has his own this is about his own personal feelings towards someone, not about, he loves his enemies, because if he loved his enemies across the board, then this action would have demonstrated over and over and over. He loves someone because there's an own personal connection to it.
Chose you before the foundation of the world. It's just incredible to consider. Like I said, there's a difference with David and Absalom. There's a difference between being a Philistine and being a son. Absalom's his son. If you're one of God's, He loves you. Even though you do a lot of rotten things, and in your unregenerate days, your whole life was rotten. There's a difference between being a son and being a Philistine. There's a difference between being Jacob and being Esau too, isn't there? It's the same type of thing. Romans chapter 5, verse 6, while we were still helpless at the right time, Christ died for the ungodly. I always pause every time I read that verse and I see the word ungodly. And I realize that's talking about me. Christ died for the ungodly. I mean, when it's phrased that way, it really hits home, doesn't it? We're reminded that we're not just, we don't just fall short in some ways. We are ungodly. We are dead in our trespasses and sins. And what does it say Christ did? He died for us. And so you see that love the Lord has for us, even though we were His enemy. For one will hardly die for a righteous man. Perhaps for a good man someone would dare to die. But God demonstrates His own love toward us, in that while we were yet sinners, Christ died for us. So I think you see a picture of that. An example. You can't push it all the way. I'm not saying Absalom's a believer by any stretch of the imagination, but I'm saying David is a picture of God. Absalom is a picture of his son. A love that exists even though the son is rebellious. Like the prodigal, right? That too is a picture of God and His love for His son, His children, His elect. And you see a little bit of that in that, I think. All right, so that's the end of Absalom. Joab does rebuke David, and David does kind of the political thing. He, greets the people, so to speak, with a heavy heart. It must have been one of the hardest things David ever did. To essentially thank the people for what they did, while at the same time just distraught over his son. And I think David was distraught over more than just the fact that his son died. I'm sure it was also everything that led up to that. The rebellion of his son. I mean, wouldn't any parent say, I sure hope God shows him grace. I hope he gets it all turned around here before he dies. But there's no evidence of that with Absalom. I mean, he was rebellious to the end. Unless, it's a thief on the cross, similar to Absalom hanging on a tree by his hair. Maybe God showed him grace in that moment. Who knows? But that's not the impression we get. All right, so that's Joab's sins against David. At least the primary one was that he killed Absalom, broke David's heart when that happened. Now Joab sins against others, and this is what he mentions to Solomon. David mentions this to Solomon specifically. Verse 5, 1 Kings 2. You also know Joab, son of Zeruiah, what he did to me and to the two commanders of the armies of Israel, to Abner, the son of Ner, and to Amasa, the son of Jether. All right, Abner, let's go to him. What did Joab do to him? What does Joab do to everybody who crosses him? Abner was Saul's general. So, after Saul's dead and they're still kind of warring between David's household, David's kingdom and Saul's kingdom, even though Saul's dead, Jonathan's dead, this kind of war continues, and as I said, David's household is winning the war. They grow stronger and stronger. Saul's people grow weaker and weaker. Abner, and you probably remember this story. I'll refresh your memory here, and this will sound familiar. Abner is the one who is running from Asahel, who is Joab's brother. And he's very fleet-footed, and the Bible says that he's running in battle. Asahel is chasing Abner, and Abner keeps saying, back off or I'm going to kill you, back off or I'm going to kill you. And Asahel will not back off, and so finally Abner takes the butt of his spear and holds it up, and Asahel runs right into it. The spear goes through him. That's Joab's brother, okay? I say this, all these little, this is like, mafia-type connections. It's
Now, what I want you to see, and I don't know how he can't, a lot of preachers never seem to catch on. Wait a minute. So, Joab wants to kill Abner because Abner killed his brother, Asahel. Abner killed Joab's brother. And so he has a grudge. He wants revenge. Wait a minute. David is going to use that as a reason for Solomon to kill Joab? David, you want Joab killed because he played a part in killing your son. You want revenge, and you're going to use the fact that Joab carried out revenge because Abner killed his brother. Come on now. This is the same situation. Or at least it's similar. Maybe not exactly the same, but I mean, look, you were mad because Joab killed Absalom, and Joab is mad because Abner killed Joab's brother, Asahel. Come on.
They're all related, and all these little political meanderings, who's going to be commander, and this one gets killed, and this one gets murdered, and so Abner kills Joab's brother. He didn't want to. He even mentions Joab, by the way, when he's fleeing from him. He says, back off. Why should I have to deal with Joab, your brother? In other words, I know your brother's going to want to kill me because I'm going to kill you, but you're not giving me any choice. Abner kills him. And Joab does initially go after him, but they end up basically coming to sort of a peace treaty, if you will. And the long and short of it is, Abner ends up making peace with David. He says, Abner comes to David and says, hey, let's just be one kingdom. What happens is he gets ticked off at one of Saul's sons. And he says, that's it, I'm going to David. And he goes to David and he says, I'm going to give our entire army to you, David. We'll all be united. And David, of course, thinks that's a good idea, and he goes along with that. And they kind of make a treaty where Abner surrenders, and now he'll be one of David's generals along with Joab. Kind of awkward, because Abner killed Joab's brother. And so after Abner leaves, Joab comes in, he hears about this. Oh, Abner has made a deal with David. It says 2 Samuel chapter 3, verse 24, Joab came to the king and he said, what have you done? Behold, Abner came to you. Why then have you sent him away? You know, Abner the son of Ner, that he came to deceive you and to learn of your going out and coming in to find out all that you're doing. He's tricking you. Well, David didn't think he was being tricked. Joab did. Goes on to tell us, so when Abner returned to Hebron, Joab took him aside. And don't go aside with Joab. If Joab says, hey, come here, I want to talk to you for a minute, don't do it. Takes him aside into the middle of the gate of the city to meet with him privately, and he struck him in the belly so that he died on the account of the blood of Asahel, his brother. So he was still carrying a grudge about the brother. Afterward, when David heard of it, he said, I and my kingdom are innocent before the Lord forever of the blood of Abner, son of Ner. May it fall on the head of Joab. So David is furious about this. I mean, he's finally achieved peace with Saul's household. And what does Joab do? He goes out and he kills the guy that was the diplomat there, the general by which he made peace. David ends up saying regarding Abner, the king said to his servants, do you not know that a prince and a great man has fallen this day in Israel? I am weak today, though. And these men, the sons of Zeruiah, that would be Joab, Abishai, Asahel, the sons of Zeruiah are too difficult for me. May the Lord repay the evildoer according to his evil. What David does do to Joab, he doesn't execute him. He does do this big public funeral for Abner. And David mourns publicly, and he forces Joab to take part in the funeral, which had to have just galled him, you know. But David says, put on clothes of mourning, join the processional. It would have been hard. All right, here's a question for you. Why didn't David just execute Joab? I mean, this is now, how many times Joab has caused problems. He's killed people he shouldn't have killed. Technically, you could have called that murder. Joab would have said, it was a war. You know, it doesn't count. Why is he not? David, he's a total wreck to David. David says, these nephews of mine, they're too much. I can't handle anymore. They're too hard. They're too difficult. Why doesn't he execute him? Get rid of this problem. Any thoughts?
Maybe because he's related. He doesn't want to deal with his sister. Possibly.
Sam?
Well, there's family. You might lose the tribe of Judah if he kills him. His nephews are his sister.
Yeah, Sam, you're a good politician. You're thinking about what might happen here. You're thinking about the ramifications of if he kills Joab, given the fact that Joab is his nephew. And that's actually the first thing on my list. He's family. No matter how big of a pest they may be, isn't it hard when it's family? All right, this is my sister's kid. So there is the family connection with Joab. All right.
And so, hey, I'm not going to kill you now. But then when he's getting ready to die, hey, Solomon, get rid of him. I've been wanting this guy to die for a long time. See, there's nothing godly about any of that. He keeps him alive maybe for political ramifications, for political reasons, right? Or I don't want to deal with family issues. But now he's dying. Like, hey, Solomon, you can deal with it. Get rid of him. Like, there's the whole situation.
Like it or not like it, he's my nephew, so okay, I'll let him live. Any other reasons why he might have? Yeah, Wally? Uriah. Explain. It was, yeah. That might be a reason why he'd want to kill him, so he wouldn't tell anybody. But you're right, he does have, Joab has dirt on David, so to speak, which in one sense that could be a reason why if David killed him it would silence him, but it could also be, who knows, maybe he fears Joab's going to tell more than he wants him to tell. I also find it's interesting when you read when David tells Solomon, kill Joab, you know what he's done to me, and also you know how he killed Abner and he killed Amasa, and he shed innocent blood in times of peace. The other murder that Joab was at least involved with the conspiracy was Uriah. And it's interesting, David didn't mention that one to Solomon, did he? That one kind of, he let go, I guess. All right, so he's family. He may not kill Joab because maybe Joab's got dirt on him. Any other reasons? I'll give you a good reason. It's wartime, and Joab's really good at killing people. As bad as that may sound, If your business is war and you got a guy that's a really good killer, I remember when I worked for a place years ago up in Tulsa, there was a guy in the sales office, absolutely obnoxious. Everybody hated the guy. You couldn't be around him. He was arrogant. He was a loudmouth. He was a jerk. Nobody liked him. Time and time again, the question would come up in the break, why don't they fire him? Why don't they get rid of that guy?
Now, I'm so glad the person in the audience, whoever that church member is, that he's got some really good church members who really know the Bible really, really, really well. And that's really, really awesome. That probably says a lot about this pastor. He's got people in the audience who knows the Bible really well, because he mentions Joab's involvement with the killing of Uriah the Hittite. Uriah was the husband of Bathsheba, whom King David had an affair with. After Bathsheba became pregnant with David's child, David tried to cover up his sin by recalling Uriah from the battlefield and encouraged him to go in and spend some time with his wife. However, when Uriah did not go to his house, but instead stayed with the king's servants, David conspired with Joab to have Uriah placed in a dangerous position in battle and where he was killed. Joab followed David's orders and arranged for Uriah to be placed in the front line of battle, where he was abandoned and subsequently killed. Joab helped cover up David's sin. Was involved in the killing of Bathsheba's husband. And so now David's about to die. And so now he's like, get rid of him. Now you can kill him. Oh, this just adds more to there's no way to make this story nice. This is even more messed up. No. Oh, you remember what Joab did to me? Solomon, do you remember what Joab did to me? No, let's not talk about what Joab did for me. No, let's talk about what he did to me. Oh, but this is a man after God's own heart. I'm so glad it's someone in the congregation who mentioned this. Now, I think he said he had it written down, so that's awesome. But this should really be talked about. So when we read, remember, I emphasized this a little bit, what he did. Hey, Solomon, you know what Joab, the son of Zeruiah, did to me? No. Hey, Solomon, do you remember what Joab, the son of Zeruiah, did for me? How he helped cover up my sin? Yeah. Yeah. Oh, but now go ahead and kill him. Now you can kill him. Now get rid of him. Now get rid of him. Joab did all kinds of things for David. He killed all kinds of people to help protect David and protect his kingdom. He even covered up David's sin, but now he gets to die.
They're never going to fire him. Why? Do you know how much money that guy makes for the company? He's the best salesman we got. You say, oh, nobody can get along with him. Well, nobody here can, but you ought to see him out on the road. You're not going to get rid of a guy that's your prize heifer, you know. I can use a farming term there. Doesn't matter how obnoxious he is if he's beneficial. And Joab was beneficial to David. Joab was a threat to anybody who messed with David in that regard. I mean,
see, you know how beneficial Joab was to David? But now that David's dying, now you can kill him. I mean, get rid of him. Oh man, this whole thing is just like, this is just like, and this is happening among God's people.
A pit bull, if it's coming at you, is really scary. But if a pit bull is on a leash coming at those who are coming at you, it's a different pit bull, isn't it? And Joab was David's pit bull to a certain extent. It could also be in this situation that it was a little bit of a gray area. Joab killed a man who really had been David's enemy. This was Saul's general. And so when he comes and supposedly makes peace, well, does he really mean that? I mean, when Joab comes to David and says, he's not making peace with you. He's just trying to figure out what you're going to do. He's deceived you. Do you think maybe in David's mind there's just a little bit of him that says, I wonder if Joab's right. Maybe it's true. Maybe he is. And so while David mourns that Joab goes and kills him, but David doesn't execute him. So maybe David's thinking, maybe he did me a favor. I don't know. Or finally, and I think this is really what hits on it more than anything else, because this is what David says, may his evil fall upon him. their blood is on Joab's head, not mine. Deuteronomy 32:35, vengeance is mine, saith the Lord. Retribution and due, their foot will slip, for the day of calamity is near for the evil. I think David figured God was going to take care of Joab in his time and in his way, just like David kind of had that.
Yeah, David is sitting there. God's going to take care of Joab, the man who helped cover up my affair. It's so messed up. Hey, this man helped get the man killed who I needed killed to cover up my affair. But now God's going to deal with him. Yeah. God needs to deal with Joab because David's off the hook. Like he's good to go. He's got, everything's good for him.
Mentality towards Saul. I'm not going to kill him. God will kill him in his time. It's interesting. You have to use discernment in killing people. Because sometimes David said, God will kill him. And other times David said, well, I'm God's instrument to kill him. Goliath, for example. So if you don't learn anything else tonight, use discernment in deciding who you should kill. I didn't get near as many laughs as I was hoping to. I'm a little bit nervous now. So don't kill anybody. That was David. So many people want to claim.
Yeah, everybody gets quiet and everybody gets uptight, but that's the reality in the Bible. One point, David's killing someone. The next point, David's not killing him. It's indiscriminate. It's messed up. It's worldly. It's fleshly. Why can't we not just acknowledge that? I'm not going to kill Joab. I'm not going to kill Joab. I'm not going to kill. Oh, but now, I got nothing to lose. Now, get rid of him. Kill him. Yeah, kill the man who helped kill the man to help cover up your affair. Oh my goodness gracious. Oh man alive. What a mess.
Claim they're David when they're having affairs and whatnot. Well, don't claim you're David if you want to kill somebody either. You're not David. So you're not a king. Yep, Sam.
But Joab, if David tried to kill Joab and Joab escaped, you actually need more names.
Oh, yeah. Can you imagine what a nightmare that would have been? If Joab had turned, if it didn't go as planned and Joab turns on David, now he's really got a headache. And David was a warrior king, but he was also a politician. He knew what he needed to do at times. And Abner's death makes David look horrible. It makes him look bad because he had made a treaty with Abner. And then David's general goes and kills him. So it made David look treacherous. That's why David does the big public display, the public funeral, and he declares, this was Joab's doing. I had nothing to do with it. There's people in the kingdom that are saying, yeah, right, you had nothing to do with it. It was your general. It was your nephew that killed him.
Isn't it absolutely amazing after David did that to Joab? Publicly humiliated him, publicly embarrassed him. Joab never ratted David out. I mean, at least I've got to try to process that, right? I mean, why wouldn't Joab be like, whoa, David, you're going to put this on me? Man, I helped get someone killed to cover up your affair. Because by your order. I just don't know. I don't know here.
All right, so that's Abner. And we'll wrap it up here with Amasa. This is just about.
I'll stop right there because we're at one. We're way into this, right? We're like over an hour and a half now. All right, so the name of that sermon is Joab, the Loyal Traitor by Shane Kastler, Kastler. Shane Kastler. I think it's an excellent sermon. I think it's an amazing sermon. There's some issues there, but I do think it's funny when he made the joke that the people got very quiet and very uncomfortable because I think people are very uncomfortable with how messed up these stories are. But I think it's excellent. You should go listen to everything else he did in regards to this entire section. in 1 Kings. I know I'm going to look for him, and I know I'm going to follow him. I think it's well worth your time. So, I mean, a lot of times we get to the end of these sermons and I'm ready to go to the liquor store because I can't take anymore. That was really well done. That was, I mean, I have to do this. I have to do this. And to the person who was sitting in the congregation that day, whatever year this was preached, and brought up the Uriah connection, oh, definitely. That was awesome. And I like the way he did ask the people questions and the people jumped in. I find it fascinating. Some people was like, David's the good guy. David's the good guy, a man after God's own heart. And another individual then kind of had talked about Joab's involvement with the whole Uriah situation. I think there's a lot. I mean, man, there are so many layers to all of this. Put it this way. When we read 1 Kings 2, and what I tried to focus on was just on this text. And even though I tried to put a little bit about why was David say what you've done according to me, okay, or what he's done to me, the whole situation is just so messed up. There's so many ways of reading that now. But I focused on the Abner and what's his name? Let's see. Let me read this. To the two commanders, Abner and Amasa. Yeah, Abner and Amasa. I focused on those, but I did not go all into everything about Joab. I focused on what Joab did to those individuals. I didn't go further back, which probably I should have, but we were trying to accomplish just a little bit. I was more trying to get to Solomon. I was trying to more get to Solomon, right? Solomon being told to kill these people is what I was focusing more on. So this is really good because it takes us a little bit, it removes us from Solomon. Right now, his goal here in this sermon really is about giving the background to Solomon. But he this is what I was afraid. If I followed this story the way he just did, I would have gotten further and further away from Solomon, right? He's doing this to give us the background of Solomon, but really this got us more into the background of Joab, the man who Solomon's going to kill. Okay, which I don't know how it can justify it I don't think you can justify this in any way, shape, or form. I don't know if you can, but it definitely added a whole new light. It got us further away from Solomon than I was trying to avoid. But hey, we'll put this in the Sermons 2.0 app challenge because it does a random sermon from it. So I think it's perfect. But please look up Shane Kastler, Kastler. He did an amazing, I think a really good job. A lot of added information here. Really good. And I don't think he completely, maybe someone in the congregation tried to kind of make David sound like a good guy. I don't think he did, I think he did a pretty good job being probably more balanced than I am on the subject. So, all right, we'll have to stop. We're well over an hour and a half. You can email me, newsif@yahoo.com, newsif@yahoo.com. That's newsif@yahoo.com. See why we're using the Sermons 2.0 app? Look at all the amazing things we can find and learn right there. Use that app, ladies and gentlemen. Use that app. All right, thanks for listening. God bless.